Moderator and friends, thank you very much for that welcome and introduction. I've been invited with Peter, who many of you will know, and you will all get to know, to present to you the CEC Open Letter on the future of Europe. Most of you will have already not only read it, but many of you will have actually contributed comments upon it, which CEC is in the process, has received and is in the process of receiving. Peter will tell us how those responses are coming, both positive and critical, in part of a process. And I hope we'll have time, I don't intend to speak for too long, I hope we'll have time for you to be able to put questions both to myself and to Peter. The letter you've had electronically and in paper, it's also in a published format in Beyond Prosperity, some copies at the back, which also has, as well as the CEC letter, a second paper, Seeking Justice and Prosperity for Our Common Future. So I commend to you that CEC publication, which Peter has edited. So really the technical questions really are better answered by Peter, but quite sensibly the bishop is put up as the fall guy first. In any letter, it's important to look at the date. We meet in Scotland, where a significant, as has been said by Matthew Ross, a significant majority of the people of this nation, Scottish nation, voted in the United Kingdom referendum on June 16 to remain in the European Union. As a result of the 52% to 48% majority for Brexit in the United Kingdom as a whole, we're all aware that the British Prime Minister has now given formal notice under Article 50, Lisbon, that the United Kingdom intends to leave. The CEC letter was drafted well before June 16 and finally accepted by the governing board of CEC just a few days before the UK referendum. At that stage, I remember saying to the board that the voting in the referendum was going to be much closer than most people had imagined. Already there were signs that it might go, what I quite candidly say from my point of view, both as president of CEC and also as a citizen, the wrong way, and the wrong way it did indeed go. But you have to remember that most of that material was drafted before the results of Brexit were known. It was drafted by members of the member churches, us, you, together with Peter. Members came from Hungary, the Netherlands, Finland, Germany, Norway, Scotland here, and Belgium. Inevitably, the situation has developed since then. But I believe its analysis remains a sound starting point. The other relevant date is the next conference of the European Churches Assembly, as we've heard from Matthew, to take place in Novi Sad in Serbia, early June next year. The open letter is part of a process leading towards that assembly, which, under the overall theme, as Father Heike said, of witness, will look at what the churches have to say about witness in relation to the reimagining of Europe, a Christian witness of hospitality and justice. The open letter is then simply an instrument towards our vision for the future, and so also is this meeting. Again, I want to reiterate very briefly, in CEC we thank both ACTS and CTBI for this meeting. Immediately after the referendum, I was in touch with Alison, our Church of Scotland member on the governing board. I was, of course, I said this privately, negotiating a transfer of nationality so that I can retain the EU on my passport if Scotland becomes independent. Well, that's half of me that believes that. From Alison, I knew of the Scottish initiative to meet, and we welcomed the wider sponsorship of ACTS and of CTBI, in which CEC happily joins today. As has already been said, CEC is engaged in other regional discussions, all looking forward to the Novi Sad Assembly next year. One such discussion was already taking place in Iceland, largely from the Nordic and Baltic countries. As has been said too, there will be another one in Volos for the south. Think of the countries of Europe who are most on the receiving end of migrants coming overland, or in Italy, migrants coming overseas, sometimes not arriving, of course, alive. And we have a planned Central European meeting as well. So this is all part of a quite complex and interesting process to get the voices and the pictures and the inspiration for the reimagining of what the churches might be able to say about the future of Europe. We shall meet in Serbia, an aspirant to the EU, but not yet a member, a country of more than one culture, but which is traditionally Slavic in orientation, but a country in which migration to the EU is no theoretical matter, but which can be seen on every station and railway line, on the lines running from the Danube through to the northwest from the southeast. The open letter is concerned, above all, with building a community of value. That's a phrase the letter uses many times, a community of value. Note that it speaks of the European project, which has always had overtones larger than just the organisational structure which go to make up the present EU. The European project, the idea, the vision, has always been broader than, for example, the coal and steel community of the early 50s, which made secret rearmament impossible. Broader also than the European Economic Community, what in Britain anyway we called the common market. And I suggest that the European project as a vision is broader than the European Union of the 90s to the present day. Amongst other things, the European project includes the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights, which institutionalises cooperation well beyond the geographical confines of the EU, and in which the UK will remain even after its likely eventual withdrawal from the Union. Central to both the foundation of the EU and its predecessors, as well as the wider European project, has been a vision of a Europe of values. Our open letter begins, as Bob has noted, with the Carta Ecumenica 2001, which of course was signed not only by CEC, but also the Council of Catholic Episcopal Conferences in Europe, CCEE. And I quote from that section, without common values, unity cannot endure. On just the 24th of March this year, on the eve of the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Rome, 57, Pope Francis also spoke of those values in very similar words. We could illustrate these values ad nauseam almost from quotations from Schumann, Spark, De Gasperi, Luns, Adenauer and others. Human dignity, peace, justice, freedom, tolerance, participation, solidarity, sustainability. As the open letter says, unity in Europe is rooted in these values, even if policy choices differ. The open letter, which I repeat is part of a process, it's far from perfect, it's a beginning, it's the start to dialogue. The open letter deals some of the by no means mean achievements of the European project and the EU itself. But it also clearly calls for that reimagining I've already spoken of. It also speaks of the manifest and interrelated crises facing Europe. You are only too well aware of them, I hardly need mention them. The violation of peace among our near neighbours in Syria and Iraq in the past, and amongst our immediate European neighbours in the Ukraine. Terrorist attacks in Spain and UK, France, Germany, Belgium and now Russia. Greatest of all is the crisis of migration, where the EU has not been able to achieve a common response, or where it has, for example, in the aspiration to change the Dublin regulation, its proposals have been rejected by member states. Its agreement with Turkey indeed seems to flout international humanitarian law. So say not only some of the churches, but also international and national NGOs, as well as the United Nations. The Schengen Agreement on free movement is inevitably already, and will become more so, a victim of the migration crisis. Economic crises, both international, in terms of world recession and recent past, and crises within the European zone, the Eurozone, and wider Europe, threaten the stability of the euro and other European currencies, demonstrating that monetary union without fiscal or economic governance can apparently only survive in times of prosperity. Couple the migration crisis and the economic crisis and look at the effect on southern Europe, especially Greece, but also including Italy and Spain, and see how ineffective in some aspects the EU has actually been, but also taking into account the veto on effective solutions from member states less close to where the crisis is first happening. With deep regret, I include my own government, my own national government, in this condemnation. It's only too easy to sit on an island and think it's affecting somebody else. Euroscepticism and the re-Christianisation, if there's such a word, of national sovereignty present yet another crisis, together with the rise of populist, neo-nationalist parties. For my education, I think that's the right word, this morning over a cup of coffee on my way to do a couple of calls, I popped into that typically Edinburgh thing, the coffee house where people are reading papers and having a coffee and a bit of cake. And, there was a paper there that I read. It was yesterday's Scottish Daily Mail. It's quite good to be educated what the opposition or what the... yes, so anyway, there we are. Populist movements, neo-nationalist parties. While we can be reasonably happy with the results of the recent Dutch elections, France is still to come, and of course Germany. The dilemma of sovereignty and interdependence remains. Coupled with this concern is that of a democratic deficit. The increase in the power of the European Council and the European Parliament since Lisbon has not, in fact, answered the deficit. Certainly in the United Kingdom, other people from Britain and Ireland may want to disagree with this, but very few people know who their Euro MP is. Very few people. The deficit is not just or mainly even towards European institutions. Behind Brexit, I believe, and again I test this out with those from the United Kingdom, behind Brexit, I think, I'm convinced, there's just as much an anti-Westminster feeling as anti-Brussels. But that's found in other countries too. Anti the political elites, as the open letter puts it. Mistrust of all political elites. So the EU and the European project, which I repeat is bigger than the EU, are at a crossroads. I quote from the open letter. There is no future for the EU if no account is taken of the growing perception that developing common policies in the EU is hard to reconcile with the wish for national sovereignty. If people cannot be convinced that giving up some sovereignty can lead to more effective policies in confronting global issues, the EU will not survive. And a little later, if people do not feel enough ownership of the EU, they will ultimately disown the Union. Yet there is the paradox of the desire of aspirant nations. Keck notes the Ukrainian protesters in Maidan Square in Kiev in 2014. I'd forgotten that the report reminded me. As they were shot down with a hail of bullets, they were wearing T-shirts with the EU 12 stars or armbands. And there are those who drown in the Mediterranean or freeze on the borders of Europe in search of the peace of Europe and prosperity. Yet not far away, just this year, I heard a Polish bishop compare the EU to the Soviet Union. And we hear of identity politics, where Christianity itself is enlisted against religious and cultural pluralism. Pope John Paul II, in a different context, spoke of the two lungs of Europe, meaning Eastern and Western, Orthodoxy and Catholicism. That needs correcting. There has, of course, been a Reformation, noted this year, next year. There has indeed been a Reformation, and also an Enlightenment. So that the two idea, the two lungs, it means expanding. But the principle of pluralism is indeed European. Another quotation, a more well-known one, Jacques Delors' famous invitation in 1990 to the churches, directly to the churches, to give Europe a soul. Or perhaps we should say, to give Europe its souls. That remains relevant, but in a pluriformity. Yet in the last 27 years since Jacques Delors' request to the churches, political debate about Europe has remained somewhat soulless. Economic and material negotiations based on self-interest have largely predominated. There are some exceptions to that, but by and large, the debate within and about Europe in the last 25 years has been about economic self-interest. I was shocked not only by the Brexiteers' arguments in the United Kingdom, but also by the Remainers. That in the UK are those who campaign to remain, the Remainers, because there was no appeal precisely to those values which inspired the original founders. No reference to the EU and its predecessors being an instrument of peace after the destructions of the Second World War. No reference to justice, economic or otherwise. No reference to the virtues of pluralism, diversity, and no reference much to sustainability. To be fair, if you actually read the Treaty of Lisbon and its precursors, such values are clearly stated. Lisbon 3:3. And economic growth and material prosperity are not seen as ends in themselves, at least in the treaty. But I stand to be corrected. I've heard few politicians, at least in the United Kingdom, to dwell on those other aspects or to advocate those core values. The open letter does not offer quick fix solutions. It is part of a process, and I'm quite sure that when we eventually reach Novi Sad and the Assembly, we still shan't have immediate solutions, but we might have just a little more vision. And without vision, the people perish. There are some clues at the end of the document. Just one bit of information about the drafting of the text. The very last section was added at the request of other members of the Keck Governing Board to give some theological clues in addition to the analysis leading up to towards the end of the document. And with hindsight, I wish we'd been able to do just a little bit more. But some of the clues are that little word, subsidiarity. Subsidiarity. This is a forensic constitutional term used in social teaching, not least in Catholic social teaching, and constitutional legislation. Subsidiarity was flagged late in the United Kingdom debate by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Anyway, I believe that that word expanded rather more theologically and perhaps constitutionally would be of immense value in trying to answer questions in which there has to be this sort of question. The question is an issue where what do we want on one particular issue more Europe or less Europe? And the answer could differ depending on the subject matter. And that's where the principle of subsidiarity comes in. You don't always have to take every decision at the highest or central level. The principle of subsidiarity is that you take it at the most appropriate level, whatever that is. Sometimes that may mean the high level. Sometimes it will mean intermediate level. Sometimes a much more local level. So subsidiarity, I think, is a very helpful clue. But perhaps we need to, my personal view, not from CEC officially at the moment, but is that perhaps needs a bit of expanding. The open letter also speaks of some Greek words as well as Latin, diakonia and koinonia. Now, I spent a lot of my life unpacking the meaning of koinonia, communion, ecclesiology. I'm working on that on the Anglican Catholic International Commission at the moment with some drafters. They are two very good New Testament words, diakonia, koinonia. Where there is mutual service, diakonia, for community or even communion, to give it koinonia its other and richer and deeper meaning, then human beings, human communities can flourish and feel at home. Now again with hindsight, I think we could have expanded these code words a little more, perhaps with some worked examples. I even suspect they may not quite have been understood. The English word diakonia is much more restricted than the meaning of that word, for example, in Germany, with the diaconal works of the church. So there's some technical things. I finish. The EU cannot survive as a beacon of hope if the law of the market is the only guiding principle. One of the issues, I think, I know ad-libbing, and just about in time. One of the issues, I think, with Brexit is that the United Kingdom came into the European Union in a kind of stop, start, stop mode. We didn't come in at the beginning. When we wanted to, we were blocked. De Gaulle, no. And then eventually, when we joined, the aspiration was, at least politically, in terms of an earlier referendum, was to join the common market. And also, the United Kingdom was not quite part of that early discussion amongst the founding fathers. And I think I'm correct on the gender. Please correct me if you can give me some women politicians and philosophers who were also speaking publicly, anyway, in a written way. You know what I mean. Britain was not quite part of that, partly because we had never been invaded. We were almost invaded, but not quite. On the Rhineland, France and Germany, peace and structures to maintain peace, to maintain a permanent peace in Europe, were at the heart of the European vision. And we kind of bypassed that a bit. But in a consumer society today, in all our nations, a consumer society, what do we expect politicians, whether pro or anti-Europe, to provide? Politicians will respond to the culture of the day because they have to have votes, they have to get votes. But here surely is where the churches have to recapture the spirit which inspired the European movement, the European project. Whatever we think of the present shape of the European institutions, those values, of course, are, I said it before, reconciliation, forgiveness, solidarity, human dignity, justice, peace. It is my hope, and thank you very much for this meeting again, that this gathering can make its own contribution towards this goal of reimagining, including next year's assembly of CEC. As has already been said, a place which has known more than its due share of warfare, contested borders, whether we think of NATO, or centuries before that in Novi Sad, where the Austro-Hungarian fortress built by Maria Theresa looks over the Danube towards the other side of what is now one city, the other side which was the Ottoman Empire. So, we look forward to meeting in Serbia, something of the past, something of the present realities, or recent present, in terms of conflict, and we look for a reimagining, a fresh vision for the continent to which you and I belong, whatever the political boundaries. Europe. Thank you.